Welcome to the Resilience Files, a podcast investigating human stories of struggle and triumph in the quest to explore the true nature of well-being and resilience and discover the secret to a resilience that lasts. If this conversation doesn't touch your soul, then we need to speak. Let me tell you a little about my guest for this episode. Firstly, Max Gleason. Max is an artist based in California, where he was living with his wife Vanessa, an extraordinarily talented musician, and his two young children, until a few years ago. On October the 25th, 2019, Max's life changed forever. His wife Vanessa, 2-year-old daughter Luiceinne, and 4-month-old son Desmond were heading up to a family gathering, but they never made it. Whilst driving, their car was intentionally struck head-on by a man attempting suicide. The driver of the car lived and has recently been charged with murder on 3 accounts. But tragically, Max's family didn't survive. After losing everything, Max went on a journey to understand why and how this could have happened and what life and death means to him. His story is profound, heartbreaking, hopeful, and filled with courage. Max speaks with a wisdom that points to our ability to transcend the most hellish of times, as he, through his investigation and probing, discovers something deeper, more impermanent than even physical life itself. Max joins us from Indonesia with his girlfriend Jasmine, who has been through a significant amount of trauma herself and has been on her own healing journey, which she now shares with Max. Since this podcast, I've reached out to Jasmine, as she is one of the most courageous warriors I have ever met, and I just had to get to know more of her story. Just to give you a taste of Max's depth and sensitivity, I want to read you an extract of something he shared on Facebook a few days after his family was so tragically taken away from him. So in Max's words, as Taoism explains, there cannot be light without dark. There cannot be love without evil. There would be no appreciation of love without evil, because we need the counterpoint with which to compare love to. Otherwise, it has no meaning, no definition. In thinking about the death of Vanessa, Lou, and Des, I'm finding some small solace in the thought that their light, collectively, was so strong that it required such strong evil to extinguish it. Theirs was not blowing out a candle with a breath. It was dumping a bucket of water on a wildfire. It needed something so strong, so violent, in order to counterbalance and honor the light that they were in this world. If I can say anything to anyone at this time, it is to be in that essence. Feel it. Stop moving around. Stop all your busy work. Live in the essence. Touch the people that you love. Hold quiet space with them. Feel them. That is all we have, and it's all you have right now, and it's all you ever will have. That is the whole point to everything. Max and Jasmine, welcome to the Resilience Files. Thank you for joining me. And before we start and dive in, we discussed that we kind of first start with Max's story and journey, particularly over the last 2.5 years. And then we would kind of bring in Jasmine and we'd kind of see where you kind of meet Max's story and journey. That's still okay with you guys?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay,
thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you for coming. I so appreciate it. I've been so looking forward to this conversation. I really have. I was telling my husband on the way here that I literally can't wait to speak to you guys. So first thing I wanted to ask you is Indonesia. You guys are Indonesia. So I just wanted to start with, how's Indonesia and why Indonesia?
Indonesia is wonderful. It's magical. And I think the why is Jasmine has been here 8 times
This
now.
is my 8th time. Yeah. And I started coming many years ago, I think subconsciously for the healing. Like, I don't think I first came here knowing that, but once I was here, it has, particularly Bali, has such a healing energy to it. And so I've studied here a bit too with yoga, and in meeting Max, we had discussed, he had expressed an interest in coming here. And I said, oh, well, I have friends, like I know it, pretty well to show you around a bit. So this is our 2nd time here.
Yeah.
Actually, we were here in May.
Yeah, so we came in May for a couple of weeks, and I had been curious about Bali for a little while because of what I'd heard about. It's, kind of a deeply spiritual place. A lot of Westerners that go there to heal or come here to heal. So we did, and once I met Jasmine, she told me that she was very familiar with Bali. We did like a little test run in May, went for 2 weeks, and that incidentally was right before the trial, which we'll go into the trial, I'm sure, later in the conversation. And then the trial concluded last month, and with that chapter of my life being complete, I had a very strong desire to get away from my familiar environment, get away from the United States, and really give myself space to kind of, I mean, it sounds cheesy, but to kind of discover who I am more now and how I want to be moving forward. And that definitely includes being with Jasmine. So we committed to coming here for 3 months, which we might extend to 4 months. So just a really long, deeply immersive time in a culture and geography that is very different than the one that we grew up in and are surrounded with on a regular basis.
It's interesting when you say that, and I don't feel there's anything cheesy about that, because in a very different way, when I left South Africa at the age of 20, I got married and I left it. And we went to Israel for a while, and then we went to London, back to Israel, back to London. And during the time I was having a really hard time, I had 5 kids in like 7 years, and I was struggling with my own mental health. And my husband, Brian, kept saying, and a lot of people around me, why don't you go back to South Africa? Your family's there. South Africa's a great lifestyle. You have a lot of help. And I kind of had no support system in London. And I was on my knees, but I didn't want to go back there. And the reason, and I love South Africa, it's a beautiful country, my family lived there, but I felt that South Africa, there was a certain identity I had in South Africa, and it's quite homogeneous, and I had a certain life, you meet the same friends, you operate in the same circles, and I felt that for my own healing as a person, and what I'd gone through in my life, I needed to be in a totally different environment where I was almost anonymous and could create something different and new. And so I very much resonate with what you're saying. And it was what kind of gave me the fortitude to stay in a place that took me a long time to settle there. But I knew that I needed to be somewhere that wasn't kind of my familial environment. So I very much relate to what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. If you kind of peel away all of the external identifiers of your life, then you're just left with yourself. And, that's a scary place to be, but it's also a place where you can learn a lot about who you are and your purpose in the world. And so that's why we're here and what we're hoping to gain from this experience.
Well, I hope it goes well. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit later about this kind of concept of identity that you spoke about so movingly, Max, in the Facebook post that you posted a few days after, your loss. And I wanted to speak to you about identity. But the first thing I actually wanted to start a little bit at the end, I wanted to ask you about the trial. If you could maybe, because that's so new and just happened, I wanted to ask you about maybe if you could just tell the listeners, the viewers, about what the trial was about and what it's meant for you as a kind of milestone, or what meaning does it have for you in this kind of healing journey? I was just really intrigued about that.
Yeah, for sure. And as you mentioned, it is very fresh. So I'm still working through a lot of my thoughts and feelings around that, but I'm happy to talk about where I am in this moment with the knowledge that it's a ever evolving process. And I mean, to kind of give the trial context, I will need to talk about the incident that caused all of this, but I'll touch on that as briefly as possible. So on October 25th of 2019, my wife and 2 children were killed in a car crash. And my wife, Vanessa, was 34 at the time, and our children were very young. Our daughter Lou was 2.5, and our son Desmond was 4 months old. So, you know, they all perished in that incident. I lost the family that I had and the family that I was building. And then, but the day that it happened, I was under the assumption that it was just an accident. And as tragic and difficult as that was, I was then informed 3 days later by a police officer that the person who ran into them did so intentionally, attempting suicide. And by some stroke of really awful luck, he survived, and Vanessa and the kids died. So it went from being an accident and a tragic loss to also a murder. So the trial that happened over this summer was the murder trial for the man who ran into them. And he was convicted of second-degree murder. The sentencing actually happened 2 days ago. And he was given a minimum of 45 years up to life. So, you know, depending on parole and how all that stuff shakes out. But he have been given every indication that he will probably spend the rest of his life in prison.
Sure.
And I think going through that trial was probably one of the darkest periods of my life. And Jasmine was with me throughout that, and she can attest to how heavily it weighed on me, and really was like a very all-consuming thing on a mental, emotional, spiritual level. And I'm incredibly grateful to her support and guidance through that process. I mean, it would have been so much darker if she was not with me. And I think as this conversation unfolds, we can talk more specifically about that. But the most challenging thing from the trial was that I was, despite the, you know, just, I don't know the right adjective, despite the ugliness of what had happened, I was aware that this person was trying to commit suicide. So I thought, you know, he's in a very lost place. He's in a very dark place. I understand that people can get to those places because life can be very hard, and, you know, mental health can be very tenuous. So I was kind of, you know, over the last 2.5 years since the crash, I was kind of hoping that I would see some humanity in this person, some way that I could have compassion for his kind of struggle through life and what would compel somebody to actually do this. And the hardest thing about the trial was that he did not show that at all. There was no remorse whatsoever. So rather than what I thought would be learning to find compassion for somebody who was lost, I'm now having to learn kind of how to reconcile that within my own being, because I'm not going to get it from him. I'm never going to get a I'm sorry from him. So I have to, you know, learn to, I've been thinking about the word forgiveness a lot, and it's a kind of a slippery word if you go into it too much, but I'm needing to learn how to forgive when the person on the other side isn't asking for forgiveness. So it's sort of like finding a place in my heart where I'm just not filled with hatred.
Yes.
And it'd be much easier if he was asking for me not to hate him, but he's not. So I just have to find that place within my interior being. And Jasmine has been hugely helpful in kind of guiding me on that path, because she's had similar experiences in her life. And, you know, ultimately what she showed me and what I'm still working at every day is that you can never really control the actions of others, or you expect to get certain emotional things from other people. Like, you can really only control how you show up in the world.
Your reaction to their action is
Yeah.
the only thing you can control.
Yeah. So that I kind of went off a bit there, but that's the result of the trial.
Wow. I mean, that's very, very moving, and also very relatable in what you're saying about forgiveness. Because I think a lot of people, I know I for sure have people in our lives who've hurt us or done something that's felt harmful or destructive. And as you said, haven't asked for the forgiveness, haven't said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. And I personally, I can think of one person that I've really struggled to find that forgiveness. And I feel bad about it, because I feel it's my thing to find that, just because I know that that's going to bring me more unity and less fragmentation in myself, and I know it feels like it's the right path to go. And it's so interesting because it's been 7, I don't know, maybe like many years that this kind of incident happened, and I haven't been able to get there. And I'm surprised, because I thought I would have been able to. So maybe it's a good time to ask you, Jasmine, like how you were able to, because it sounds like you've had an experience of that. Because what you're saying is true, and we all know intellectually it really is the only thing that we can control is our own, experience. But it's really hard.
Easy to say, but hard to embody.
Exactly.
Yeah. So my experience, very different than Max's experience, but also understanding that people just sometimes show up as such darkness, and it's hard to digest that. I spent most of my childhood and adolescence, probably from like 7 to 16 or 17 years old, living most of the time in a home with a very abusive step-parent, a very abusive stepmother that was, she was on a lot of drugs. She was on meth in particular and drank a lot. And I was the source of her, or to take out her anger with life or whatever it was. She was very physically abusive, mentally abusive, sexually abusive. She was just like a real dark human being. And I didn't feel safe a lot, in a time where you're supposed to be nurtured and supported to form who you're supposed to be or who you're going to be. I didn't have a lot of that. I didn't feel safe a lot. And I became somebody that was swallowed up by the darkness. I lived in hatred for a long time. I was very angry and couldn't express my anger. And, and now in my work that I do, in my studies, I've learned that I actually had PTSD, living in a space of fight or flight, breath in my chest, insomnia, digestive issues. Like, my whole body was shutting down, constantly having adrenaline and cortisol coursing through my body, the stress hormones. And I wasn't able to live fully. Like, I just thought something was wrong with me too. Because when you're so young, you take on these things from people that are supposed to be nurturing you, and you take it on as your fault. And then you're told it's your fault. You're a bad kid, or this is why this is happening to you. And you really take that on to be true information, which is so unfortunate. And being in such a hyper aroused state, being in that, fight or flight state, when I became old enough to seek to self-medicate, it was all downers, pot or alcohol or anything to get my system to come down a little bit, which now is heartbreaking to think about, because I was struggling so deeply just to be. And luckily I got into meditation and started to try to control my breath, because I couldn't sleeping a couple hours a night. Everything was off. Brain fog, all interest died, creativity died. You're simply just surviving, waiting for the next ball to drop. And I feel so lucky that I've formed meditation and kind of started to get quiet and able to even just listen to that very, very tiny voice inside me that was begging me to turn towards the light, to get quiet, to get still, to then learn about meditation. And I started to do meditation and then learn about yoga and started to do these things regularly. And then in getting my intuition stronger, started listening to it. And it brought me to a trip to India to further my education, to learn about breath, and then coming to Indonesia and seeking healing in that way, like really getting quiet and listening to my intuition and following it to places. And then I found yin yoga, and I really noticed how much better I felt. And I don't know if you know what yin yoga is.
No.
So yin is all supported, depending on what type you do. What the type I do is all supported on the ground with like bolsters and props. So you feel very supported. So in a way, in practicing this every day, I was able to reparent myself, re-nurture myself. And then it is amazing. Like, it's really like, I was my own guinea pig. Like, I started to feel better with it. And I was like, oh, this is good. Like, and then it was really when COVID hit that I was like, kind of started to develop my own class with it. So I was doing the yin yoga, and then I incorporated what I learned in India. So I spent a couple of months there and really found my breath, and found that breathing into my chest is this, it's a byproduct of living in fight or flight, and started to breathe into my belly. And I just started to notice so much change in just that, like, oh, I was 26 or something when I was there, and learning that I didn't know how to breathe correctly, and how much changed with that. So I incorporated the breath work that I learned into the yin yoga postures. And through that time in COVID, where, we all had so much time, I found that I was able to pull myself out of fight or flight and into rest and digest, or rest and restore. So it was like a, kind of a continual journey of getting better. But my insomnia went away. My digestive system, my like digestive issues went away. Like, my body was able to heal for the first time and rest. And then I thought, I can't be the only one. Right. So in my healing process, I started to understand that, like, your pain doesn't need to be a crutch with how you choose to live your life. It can be a tool to help other people, and it's been so, so beautiful to see that and kind of understand that, like, look at my pain and my trauma as like, okay, that was necessary to get me to this place. I can shed that skin of being that person, and that, it's a part of it. But now I have this information, and I'm more sensitive to the human experience, and I can help. And I've found with finding clients, I'm noticing some really beautiful changes in people. And it's so nice to give them their life back. At least it's not going to fix everything, but when you're showing up with a calm nervous system, a lot changes, and you're not waiting for the next ball to drop, or you're not stuck in that space of hyper arousal. And like, when the threat has passed, you're not able to come back to a calm baseline. So it's been really rewarding work that's continuing to grow, and I'm understanding it more every day. But
well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. And I'm so interested, and we're going to have a conversation after this podcast, because in the last 6 months, I've become increasingly interested in breath work and the kind of things you're talking about. I've got a whole bunch of books next to my bed. There's a new book that's come out called Breath, and I'm not, it's not a thing that's intuitive for me. I've always been like, no, I can't do, my mind's way too busy to do meditation, etc. And so I almost feel like I need help getting in it. But I've been struggling with long COVID and glandular fever and a whole bunch of kind of a little bit of autoimmune stuff, and also feeling like this. And I'm totally convinced that it's connected to some kind of adrenal cortisol, trauma that's in my body that's showing up and not allowing my immune system to just kind of calm down and heal, as you say. And there's something about me that's intuited that I need this kind of thing in my life. And so I've been like dabbling with it, but it sounds like you'd be a good person to help me with it. So we definitely need to speak.
I dedicated my life to learning about it. And it's just to say one more thing about it too, that when you do like with the stress hormones, and what I've studied and found is that in these postures with this breath work, you're able to bring your stress hormones to a regulated level, which is like pretty amazing, that like it's doing so much. So I'm your resource. Any questions? I love talking about this stuff.
Okay, brilliant. Okay. So I have another question that is, I think directed at Max. And again, like, feel free, Jasmine, if you want to come in. I don't know if you know, maybe you know, I'm a big God person, right? So, and purpose and meaning is a big thing for me. And Max, when I heard you speak with Mara, your sister, around 6 months after the accident, I don't even know if we call it accident. Do we call it murder? Like, what do you call it? What's the appropriate thing to
I call it crash.
after the crash?
I call it the crash.
Crash.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because accident accurate. There was nothing.
Okay. Okay. You're freezing a little bit, but I got it's a, so 6 months after you spoke about almost going on this, it sounded like a little bit from, the listener's point of view, frantic journey to try and find answers, to try and see if you could find some kind of meaning, etc. And in a way, it was also an escape from kind of sitting with the grief, which I think is such a human response. And recently I lost my father, and I can almost see my mother doing the same thing. It's like, from a person who lived a very quiet life, her next year now is filled with trips and things and etc. And I think it's kind of a natural human response. And then COVID stopped that in its tracks. You couldn't go on that kind of journey and search. And you had said at the time that it was a good thing because you realized that you were running after answers, and and you didn't need to have the answers right then. But what I wanted to ask you now, like 2.5 years later, or whatever the exact time scale is, do you still feel that way? And have you found any answers, or have any answers found you, maybe over this period?
Yes, I mean that's a good question, and I do think. I mean, I wouldn't say that I have answers necessarily, but I feel much more resolved in that there is meaning to my experience. And I think it's human nature to desire meaning in life, to desire meaning in anything. So, as bizarre as it sounds, I think it was what happened to Vanessa and my children was going to happen. It was a necessary thing. I believe that, our souls are here with kind of an agenda, and a lot of what we're meant to learn in this experience comes from the pain that we are, the pain that's given to us, the pain that we have to endure. So for whatever reason, my soul decided to sign up for a really difficult journey this time around. And the other part of what makes this very palatable is that I do believe that Vanessa and my children still exist. I believe they're in a very beautiful space. I believe they're with me all the time. So they're okay. And it's kind of like I'm the one who is left here to sort through this pain and to make something out of it. And I think ultimately the main takeaway is that it peeled me open to a more authentic version of myself that I wasn't really embodying prior to this. And I'm still kind of discovering what that more authentic self is. And then, similar to what Jasmine was saying, it's like once something like this happens to you and you're able to find a path to healing, the most natural and immediate thing is like, okay, now I want to help other people. And that's the place that I'm in now, is I want to use my experience to be of service to others, to help others journey through their pain. And that's happened it's already happened over the last 2.5 years in a variety of forms, through podcast interviews like this, through just conversations with other people who have lost very significant people in their lives. And also through the artwork that I make. I mean, it's kind of opened up a new dimension in the art that I make, and that I'm really making art for other people, and like getting into their stories rather than making art about myself and my story.
Beautiful.
So yeah, I mean, that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I'm, I think part of us being here in Indonesia is so I can further kind of probe what that might look like, is how can I use this to be a positive influence in the world rather than, just being bitter and hateful and curling up in bed and being depressed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I've
And
got
I
so.
think that's
Sorry, Jasmine.
I think it's a big part of being here, because in meeting Max and forming our relationship, he's asked me, like, well, how do you know where to go? Like, how do you know what the next step is? Because I'm not really sure. I mean, I have some things going, but I know I want to help, but I just don't know how that's going to manifest completely. And I told him, the times where I felt most lost, I would go to Indonesia and just get really quiet, slow everything down. Like, the best information comes from getting quiet for me. And it's already seemed to have a lot come up for both of us being here and really slowing down and disconnecting in a way from our normal, lives. So I think getting quiet is
Definitely
a great step.
And I think when you say it's such a human thing, it's when our minds quieten down, the information that we gifted is just of a different order. And it's what's appropriate for the next step. It's responsive to life, that information. It's responsive to the present moment. And to me, it's of a divine nature. So I'm so with you, and Indonesia seems like a good place to do it. I don't think London's such a good place, but part of the work we do is we show people it's independent. It's not the place, right? Because it's a space in us that if we are into it and we have the right intent and we understand how it's a place that we can all access. But I wanted to. There's so much about what you just said. I wanted to comment on, Max, like just what you said about the soul is something that has been my come from for ages, since I became, more kind of religious or more spiritual religious at the age of 18. And it's something that holds me in my life, that knowledge that we're a soul. This little time on earth is just a blink in the eye of a kind of an infinite life that we have. And it feels like this is the whole thing. So this feels so important and etc. And it is important in terms of the journey we need to make, because, I believe that there's a reason we're here. There's a correction and there's something we're grappling with, and when we've done our work, we leave. But this is such a small, and it's so, it puts everything into context. It gives things a different perspective when you have that come from. The thing that I guess I wanted to ask you just about that is and maybe you don't know, and maybe it's not something we can pinpoint, but how did you come to that from where you started, from how did you arrive at that? Because I had kind of the philosophy and the teachings of our Torah and, Kabbalistic and all the kind of deep learnings of, of the religion of Judaism, which teaches this. But how did you arrive at
that? I arrived at it through the crash, and that propelling me on this kind of search for meaning that we were talking about before. So I, prior to the crash, I would have always considered myself a spiritual person, but I realized that most of that spirituality operated on a very intellectual level, so I went through, phases of Buddhism and kind of like more New Age spirituality, and read a lot of books and, did the kind of sitting in meditation in various forms, but it never really left my head and went to a more embodied space. And literally like when the crash happened, it hit me in a very visceral, like punch to the soul kind of way. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it, but it wasn't in the head. It was operating somewhere else. And that kind of peeled me open. And then I just, kind of similar to what Jasmine was saying, I got very quiet and I was just listening to my intuition and my, the kind of inner voice or higher self or whatever people want to call it. And there were things that just started making sense to me on a more embodied level that I'd never experienced before. And some of it was, as literal, but as metaphysical as I would feel their energies around me, so I would feel Vanessa and my kids around me at certain times. And it, it's not provable, but I knew it was them. And then I started having dreams with them that were unlike any dreams I had ever had before. And I knew that it was them coming to communicate with me on this other realm of consciousness that we can't access when we're just kind of walking around here doing our daily stuff. So I was having those kind of experiences pretty frequently right after the crash. And then that piqued my curiosity. So I started reading about people who had near-death experiences. I had readings with mediums, some of which were, pretty undeniably getting real communication from them. And all of the kind of information that I was getting back from this inquiry led me to believe in a very, in a real belief way, not in an intellectual belief way, that like, oh yeah, I'm a soul, I'm a spiritual being, and I'm having this earth experience right now, but this is like a very small slice of the overall reality. And the more that I kind of walk this path, there's just more and more that reaffirms that, so it becomes true in a very real way because it's felt and because there are so many other people who have had these similar experiences. So that's.
Yeah, no, I love what you say, and it's so so resonant, because these moments in our lives where when we brought to our knees, it forces you to look deeper than we operating. It almost forces you to look for something more truthful, because what we have isn't enough. That's how I felt in those moments, that what I have isn't enough to get me through this. So I have to look for something more, something that's more powerful, more true, and you find it, when you search your soul for that, your soul has those answers, and they brought up. It's not such a shame, but it takes often these moments where we're so crushed to bring about something so beautifully true and meaningful in our life. But I guess that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the hope that you have, because in the pain, you're suddenly seeing so much beauty and hope and truthfulness that, that's what propels us to want to live, and to, and how beautiful life is despite the kind of the pain and suffering we're going through or have gone through. So definitely resonates with me.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And that's where the kind of one of your earlier questions is like, how do you find the meaning in it? And, how do you find the meaning in tragedy? And once you experience it, kind of get through the sheer rawness of the immediate after effects, you realize like these experiences are necessary in order to open up to that kind of deeper, more, I don't know, truthful, authentic experience of what it can be to have a human experience on this earth. I mean, there's many degrees, and I think some people have a pretty easy ride and some people have a really hard ride, and you can learn from the really hard ride, or you can, not, but that there is the opportunity through what seems like the most painful possible thing to really have a deep experience, a deeply human experience.
In Judaism, there's the saying, it's called, is that, it's okay, we can't hear, it's not bothering us.
The chickens and roosters going.
There's this this phrase called Yasurim Shel Ava, which means Yasurim are seen as the trials or the struggles or the suffering a person goes through. because there's a philosophy that these are here to build us, to grow us. But Yisurim Shalava means sufferings with love. They with love, because generally speaking, like, to me, a very immature or childish way that we look often at, at God is that he sends us these things to punish us, to give us a rap, etc. But when you see that they're there with love because they're teaching us, they're opening us up, they're evolving us, they're evolving our soul, it's very beautiful. And I remember at a very difficult time in my life where I was very ill and I had like facial paralysis and I was getting sicker and sicker. And I remember, and I couldn't take light, and my face was frozen, and my husband sitting next to me, and he like kind of burst into tears and said to me, I can't take seeing you like this. And I said to him, but this is like a Yisurim Shalava. This is my, and I felt it. I felt the beauty of what I was learning, and I happened to have a very quiet mind at that time, and I was learning so much, and it felt so beautiful, even though I was in pain and all the, not knowing what was going to happen. So I really felt, as you said, Max, it wasn't an intellectual thing. I felt the truth of it. It really did feel like a gift. So yeah, and I guess maybe off that, I'd ask both of you, like, this concept of your identity, like your structure, everything about your life breaking down. And, Max, you spoke about after the accident, when your family, your life, your future, it's all who you are. It's part of your identity. And Jasmine, you were talking about this person, who had lived in so much darkness and with so much pain and struggle, and that becomes your identity, etc. And when those break down, almost, those shatter, like, I'd love you to talk about that, because I've met a few people that's happened, that almost there, because of life circumstances or part of their journey, it's almost like the identity shattered and they left almost for a while in nothingness. And then they got to kind of build something new, and I just wanted to ask you what you guys have learned or are learning about that process.
Yeah, I mean, I think mine was a gradual, like Max had everything happen at one time.
Yeah.
Mine was a gradual, and then in what I experienced, living in hatred, kind of matching that darkness and living in that for many years and numbing out and not, being aware, when I hit a space where I realized hatred isn't a sustainable emotion. I was sick a lot. I wasn't really living. And at that point I had a trigger with my PTSD, and I, kind of, I guess that is what you're talking about. Like, I had a breaking moment where it was like all that trauma I had experienced was right back at the surface, and I could feel it in my body. I could feel it tenfold to the other, triggers that I had. And I decided to go to India, and I was having so much anxiety, so much depression at that time. And I remember asking one of my teachers, because I'm a very dedicated student. I would do these postures, breath works, like, tell me to do it, I'll do it. Mm-hmm. So I asked one of my teachers, Pankaj, I said, so I have a lot of anxiety and depression. Like, what is the breath work? What is the posture I can do? Because I'll do it every day. And he laughed at me and he said, how are you of service to the world around you? And I said, well, no, didn't you hear me? I'm in a lot of pain. I don't really, the other world around me, like, I'm hurting so much. And he said, go home and dedicate yourself to being of service and being in service of love to people you interact with, everyone, and see how your life changes. So I think that was the start of my new identity, living outside of my pain and starting to live a life in love, even if that was hard to do, like doing my mantra meditations and I am loving awareness. And really, even if I didn't believe it at the time, starting to have those words and those thoughts going, and then looking for opportunities to show up and be of service, be it listening to the checkout person, when they talk to me about how their day was, and making direct eye contact, or, teaching a yoga class and actually listening to people, or taking my mom's dogs for a walk, like really small acts of service that when you start to live that way and embody that, my whole system changed, my whole being, my whole identity changed, stepping out of the darkness and knowing it, and having lived in it enough to know I couldn't live there anymore. And then stepping into this space of love And even feeling in that, because my abuser doesn't care, doesn't feel sorry, doesn't feel anything. I don't know if it's the drugs or just simply who she is, or that's the experience I'm supposed to have, that there's no, I'm sorry, I'm never going to hear that. That showing up as love in spite of that is like a silent protest within yourself to all that darkness. Like, and it doesn't really matter if anyone else gets it. It's like, no, I'm going to still turn towards the light, and I'm going to break this cycle of, violence or hatred, because it doesn't actually penetrate me anymore. So that was, I would say that was a really helpful moment in learning to be of service and stepping outside of my pain, because everyone suffers. That's what I broke open to, is that like, I'm not the only one that hurts in the story.
Yes, that's beautiful, by the way. It's also very interesting that when a person can say something like from their heart, they can enter your heart, and often people say things and they're just kind of, yeah, sure, what do you mean? And we carry on. But they're just these moments where it actually goes into our heart, and then it becomes the catalyst for something. So that's just incredible that, those are special moments,
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing that I would add to that, and I feel very much aligned with everything that Jasmine just said, but the one thing that I noticed, because mine was so abrupt, it was like a total shock to the ego. And you realize how much of, and not by any fault, but like how much of your perception of reality is informed by your ego experience, So not that I wasn't a feeling full, soulful person before, but I really was living most of the time in an ego space, which, the ego says, okay, I am this person, my wife is this person, I live at this address, this is my job. And those things form my identity and my reality and how I relate to the world. And when all of that is stripped away, like, if it's stripped away very abruptly, like it was with me, you're kind of left without an ego, or I still had an ego, but the ego wasn't like front and center anymore. And when the ego doesn't get to be front and center, the other parts of you kind of are able to rise to the surface. And, as traumatic and scary as that was, it was a very cool experience. So, one way that I've described, especially those early few months right after it, was, it was like the most pain I've ever experienced, but I was the most filled with wonder that I've ever been in my life, because I was just like, like colors seemed more intense, and, just kind of everything was perceived in a way that I hadn't really perceived it before. And I would attribute most of that to like my ego mind taking more of a back seat, and whatever else comes in that place, whether it's your soul or, yeah, I guess soul is the best word, kind of is able to experience this reality in a more immediate way. That's over time that has receded. There is kind of like this immediate experience, and you're all exposed, but then the ego is really strong, and it starts coming back in. It's like, okay, well, now let's grab this thing and hang on to that.
Yes.
You don't have the family anymore, you don't have the address anymore, but like grab this and hang on to that. So it's been kind of fascinating to watch that process just within my own being and how I orient to the world.
Yes. What I love about what you said, Max, I've had an experience of that, living from that place, as you say, with such beauty, where there's such beauty and there's so much simplicity, and all those feelings almost crystallized. They're so clear. And so, it's almost overwhelming, the beauty that you can feel, and the gratitude and but then, as you say, of it getting, what I call getting covered again, losing sight of it. But what I've always felt is that we're not meant to, because we're a soul in a physical body, we're not meant to live out of that all the time. But those moments when we do, especially as powerfully as you described, they moments that shine a light for us. They're almost like, it feels like I've heard a metaphor that you're in a dark forest and then there's a flashlight, a flash of lightning, and you see everything completely clearly, and then it goes again. And they show you what's true and what's possible, and they provide some kind of North Star for us, even when they're not there. I think the thing that people grapple with, which is something I haven't grappled with in my life, is that I don't mind when it's not there. I don't mind when it's covered and I'm grappling like a human being with everything else, because I know that it's within me. And I feel that's what our pathway is in life. It's to grapple with life, and then to have those moments where that comes through. But once you know it's there and you've experienced it, as you spoke about, in such almost unstripped, you don't have any doubts that it's there and it's true, and it's more true and more real than anything else that we experience, so that's at least been my experience.
Yeah, and it's, I totally agree, and it is a gift if somebody is able to have that, even like you're saying, if it's a fleeting moment, but being able to see who they are without all of the kind of mental constructs that you have about who you are. And once you see it, it can kind of always be there as a memory. It's never, well, at least for me, it's not the way I operate on a daily basis. But if things start to get really heavy, or if I'm just in a kind of a very blissed out state, like I remember that. I'm just like, oh, I'm just like a soul, some act of the divine who came here to have this, kind of cool, kind of bizarre, kind of challenging experience for a certain number of years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Max, if the work we do at our heart, and we work particularly with young people, but also with parents, teachers, adults as well. But we call this place, a place of innate well-being or innate resilience, where that every human being has this capacity to feel this feeling of deep connection and love and gratitude and hope and optimism, and have this kind of clarity of mind and this kind of stillness of mind. It's the most fundamental part of us. And it's, I think, and we teach that no one and no thing can take it away, because it's built in and it's constant and it's sacrosanct. To me, it's holy. It can't be diminished and it can't be added to by anything. So no event or person can add to it or take away from it. It's something that's within us, and that's part that comes the fabric of our psyche. And so we teach this to young people. And as you say, every person has glimpsed it, but often we reason it away. We say we glimpsed it because we're in a beautiful place, or because of it was, tied to a person. We misattribute it rather than recognizing that it exists within us. And the thing that I wanted to ask you is, you said something that I think is incredibly powerful, and this was quite soon after the accident. You said, I can be okay even if my wife and children aren't here, I can be okay. And I think that was testament, and then you can tell me, to you touching into this place of deep okayness, and knowing that, and that's the knowledge that comes from that. But the thing that I wanted to ask you about that statement is that, David Bohm, who's influenced a lot of kind of our framework that we teach at our heart, he talks about the fact that there are things that human beings feel are necessary. And he says the word for necessary is cedere, and the Latin word for cedere is won't yield. So in our minds, in our psyches, when we think something is necessary, it won't yield. It's like stuck, it's steadfast. It's like some reality doesn't shift, right? Reality just is. And in our minds, there are things that we feel are necessary, are absolutely necessary for us to be okay, for us to be at peace, for us to be able to truly, truly be able to, to live with love and etc. And part of what we do at our heart is we get people to challenge those, what we call false beliefs or attachments, the things that we've outsourced our okayness to, things like even the well-being of our family, the people we love, or our health, or our finances, or our careers, or our success, or whatever it is that we feel those things are responsible for my okayness. And if they're not there, they'll rip them away. And most people that you work with are like, yeah, but like it feels so difficult to see that if something happened to my loved ones, and I mean particularly in a case like yours, when it's not somebody that's elderly or has been sick, you know, it's something that the young family's ripped away, that can't be possible. There's no ways. There must be that you can't access that okayness. The fact that you said that, like, to me is the ultimate freedom of mind, you know, freedom of, it really, really is, or so powerful. And I just wanted to ask you about that, like, because I think it's so hopeful for people that feel not me, like that would crush me, that would take any sense of me being okay away forever, would scar me, damage me, break me. And so you're kind of a living embodiment. No, this isn't just some kind of nice philosophy, like this is true, you know. So I just wanted to ask you about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's a big one. I don't really know, but because I only know my experience, and you know, so I'm hesitant to give advice for how other people could achieve that, because the way that it happened to me was like really just like like I described before, it's like a gut punch to the soul. I mean, it was like, you know, super abrupt, super kind of like exposed me in a very raw way. And that's how I got to that place. But the one thing that might be helpful, and I've said this to a few people before, but it's kind of like it's not me. Like there's a system at work within me, you know. So in the same way that like I'm not beating my heart, you know, I'm not, there's like amazing miraculous things happening within me all the time on a biological level that I have no control over. And I also think that that can operate on a spiritual level if you kind of just step back and get yourself out of the way and allow spirit to express itself through you. So I think, you know, I didn't like set out on a mission and meditate myself to that place. But as I was describing before, it's kind of like my ego got stripped away. So then that default system just came through. And I'm very fortunate that that happened to me, but I don't think that it was like a conscious thing. I just knew that I didn't want to let what happened consume me and kill me. So the only other option was, how do I heal? And the healing was much more of like this default mechanism that kicked in. Once I made that choice to heal, it was, a lot of it was, you know, getting quiet, like Jasmine said, listening to my intuition, and kind of allowing, you know, whatever it is, the divinity of life to express itself through me.
So that's
I don't know, do you have?
The thing that you said, Max, was just about the universality of it, you know, is that's what, when I was on my journey and I felt a little broken by what I'd gone through, when I went through a period of just consuming literature and books on every human being that had suffered. It didn't matter why they'd suffered. And I remember at the time, my husband was like, "You're such a sadist. Like, why are you buying all these books?" Besides, that was making us totally broke. But the thing is, it wasn't the suffering, it was the transcending the suffering that interested me. And what interested me is because I always thought the reason I struggled was because of individual circumstances, you know, my past and my personality and a whole bunch of factors that were about Terry. But what I started to see in reading these books is that these people were also, they were also different. You know, some had fantastic childhoods and some had, you know, came from poverty, and everyone had different personalities, but yet there was something universal running across all their stories. At the time, I called it the human spirit, but I started to see it's something universal that exists within all human beings. that can transcend adversity. And I became interested in it. And that was like kind of what got me, like that was my quest to kind of track it down and just see if I could learn more about it. Because I saw that I wasn't an exception to it. No human being was. And that's what kind of excited me and spurred me on. Yeah. So I guess what I wanted to just, we got to, what about you guys? I'd love to, first of all, I'd love to, I want to know all the gossip about how you met and all of that. I don't know if that's for the podcast, but, or we can talk, but I'd just like to know, because it's beautiful to see you together. And I don't know you until this conversation, Jasmine, but like I feel that it's beautiful for you to have met Max of what you've been through. And of course, Max of what you've been through. It just seems like such a beautiful coming together. And I would just love to know what this relationship's, how it's helping both of you and serving both of you.
Yeah, I think being from such a small town, I didn't know Max, I didn't know Vanessa, I didn't know their kids, but I knew everyone knows the story. It's such a small town. And I will say, in the work that I'm doing and cultivating, that a lot of my meditations now are for my students to find me, for people that need work on their nervous system to find me. So I became very interested in Max and what he was going through and what was happening with his nervous system. And then I became very interested in his art. I'm always trying to find more space for art in my life. And I started to follow him on Instagram and kind of just watched him from afar on Instagram, just paintings he was doing, and but didn't really know how or if I would ever meet him, even though it's such a small town. And so how we met is actually funny. I commented or sent a emoji on one of his paintings on a story on Instagram. So I slid into Max's DMs on Instagram. That's how we met. And he responded right away.
Oh, wow.
And said, I think we're from the same town. And we have mutual friends, and I don't think we've ever met. And I said, no, but I'm really interested in your art. And he invited me to a studio. And at this time, I'm thinking, I think Max is very attractive, but I'm still thinking I can be a friend. I'm not thinking romantically, I'm thinking, I can be a friend. I can be of service in this way, in the back of my mind, women were always planning things. I'm like, I would love to give him free yoga, trying to, have all these plans, but not thinking romantic, and then he invited me to a studio, and it was so nice. We just talked for, I don't know how many,
2 hours.
Yeah, 2 hours just talking, about art. And then we finally got into his experience and what he was going through. And then he asked me to grab, dinner, because our conversation was so good, and we went to dinner that night. So it was very very organic how we met, and how easily we spoke to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, to go back to kind of more of a leaning into the cosmic unfolding of life. When Jasmine came into my world, it was very interesting timing, because she and I have developed a very deep connection and are having what I think is a very wonderful relationship as romantic partners. But given where she was in her journey and wanting to be of service to people, and I, so we've been together for about 9 months now. So the kind of it at that point, so this was late December of last year of 2021, I'd had 2 years of grief at that point, and I had really been through I processed a lot around the loss of losing us and the kids. And then I had the trial coming up, and the trial was delayed much longer than it normally would have because of COVID. But Jasmine kind of came into my life as I was moving into what I knew would be this other very dark ordeal in my life of going through the trial. And all of her kind of healing energy and desire to be of service was beautiful for me to have, because I don't, and it was very challenging. I mean, she can tell you, it definitely tested us many times. But if I didn't have her level of support to carry me through that process, I don't think I would be doing as I am now. So I do believe there's kind of like a cosmic destiny in terms of when she came in
Yes.
to my life. And yeah, and very grateful for that. And now, part of us being here in Indonesia together and the trial is done is like to really, at least I think, for us to really focus on us and our future and what we want our lives to look like moving forward. Which is, an amazing thing and kind of a beautiful gift that's been given to me, is that I don't, I have something to be hopeful about for the future. It's not just
Yes.
this dark history.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what, I mean, I've got a few questions out of that, but one of the things I just didn't want to bypass, because I've heard you touch on this in another podcast, Max, and it was, I think, very profound, and I think will be very helpful for other people who've lost partners at a stage where it feels like their deepest love's been ripped away from them and they'll never love again. They'll say, I can't, and it feels betrayal, or it just feels impossible, or it feels like, and I heard you just talking beautifully about almost the reconciliation of kind of your relationship with Vanessa now, and negotiating the past with the present, I think were your words, in terms of, love. And it sounds like you'd had so much wisdom to offer in that respect. And I know it's your own, and you're very humble that it is your own experience. But I think your own experience is very hopeful and helpful for other people. So, will you tell us a little bit about that?
Meaning in terms of like finding love again, specifically, or?
Yeah, especially when you're, you haven't decided to get divorced or moved on from someone because you don't love them. They've kind of, as you say, been ripped away from you, and that love is still there. And then, so I just wanted to understand that, because I can see you guys you just look so right together and so happy and so good, so.
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I mean, there's a few things I can say about that. First of all, I'm, like in feeling into it in more of a intuitive level, I know that Vanessa just wants me to be happy. And I know that she knows that love brings me a lot of joy and happiness. Having a partner to share love with in this experience brings me a lot of joy. It brought the two of us a lot of joy when we were together and married. And I just know that she wants that for me. And I also think, I mean, if this is going to be potentially advice for other people, like I think it's okay to hold on as long as you want to the person who's gone. There's kind of beauty in that, and everything happens on its own timetable. And it can last the rest of your life. I mean, if that's your choice, if you want to hold on to that one love. But for me, it was very important for me to find love again in my life, because I really enjoy sharing the human experience with somebody else. Yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I think we meant to love, and I think that's beautiful. And for you, Jasmine, I mean, it wasn't like, it doesn't sound, I mean, slipping into his DMs, and you sound like a courageous warrior, but it wasn't intimidating for you in any way. Like, how's it been for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in meeting Max and thinking he's like, and feeling that he's one of the most beautiful humans that I've come across yet. and feeling his pain. Like, I don't know how his pain feels, but feeling his grief and feeling his pain when I first met him and continually throughout a relationship, the challenge, it's, and it obviously it's not going to be a super easy relation. Like, we have ease together, but for me too, like finding a way, like not ever meeting Vanessa, but having so much respect for her and admiration and liking to hear stories and liking to hear about her, and in no way wanting to fill a space or, have her be forgotten. It's hard to navigate that and, to forge a new relationship, but also have such respect that you're trying to like having a new relationship is challenging on its own. Right. So managing this while trying to forge a new relationship and make sure my needs are being met, but also having respect, it's a lot, but we've found a good groove with it. We do communicate very well, but yeah, I mean, I think as challenging as it is at times, it's totally worth it. Like, Max is so lovely and so beautiful. And I think patience is really big, like, and I'm not perfect in that. I'm so very human that, I, can be overcome with things at times and want things to be about me. But, coming back to that space of patience and like, if feeling in my heart and my soul that this is something very good, and that like seeing Max through this time, and really just kind of taking a step back, and like, especially during the trial, like we had a conversation where it was like, is it that I think we should take a step back really romantically, and like, I can just be here if you need me, but like giving you space, and like, having my needs really not be at that time, and just communicating, like really communicating about what we need and what we feel. And like, Max's wound right now is like bleeding out far more than my wound. So like, we're going to tend to that. And yeah, I think it's the most communicative relationship I've been in. And I think it wouldn't have survived if not, and speaking about your emotions and how you feel is a lot of what we do.
I think one thing that Jasmine just said that I do think is an important thing is, she said, I'm not trying to fill a space. And I think, for potentially other people who are widows or widowers, that's an important distinction, because they're, and to be honest, my experience very early on, right after, was like, replace is a weird word, but like, I need to start over. Like, I need to get back what I just had. And that's kind of a very understandable and very human, but a pretty knee-jerk reaction. And I think what's really beautiful about me and Jasmine is that it was enough time afterwards that she came into my life that I wasn't, I don't think she's replacing Vanessa in any way. And I think the dynamic that I have with Jasmine is very distinct from the relationship that I had with Vanessa. And they're both beautiful and they're both filled with love, but I don't expect her to be somebody other than who she was, or other than who she is, and yeah, and I love that about what we have now,
That's beautiful, because it almost feels to me, though, because Max, what I've seen, there's different phases to our lives, and we almost like, it's almost like, there's a different part of you that kind of died and was reborn after this experience. Sorry to be dramatic like that, but it's almost like this version of Max gets to have this beautiful love relationship, and it's not like there's two separate versions, they live within the same soul, but I'm saying there was a different version that had that beautiful, and they both can be complete stories. They're all complete stories, in of themselves.
A lovely way of putting it.
Yeah.
And it's true, one life can have many stories.
Yeah, exactly. Anyhow, I can't tell you how much joy it gives me to see the two of you. You look so beautiful together, and you're such a kind of spiritually evolved couple, which doesn't mean that, as you say, you don't have your humanness, and we all do, and I love that about us humans. I love the fact that we grapple in that way, etc. But there's a solid foundation there for both of you, and that's beautiful. So we look. I'm interested to see where this love story goes. Keep us posted. So I guess maybe maybe a question for both of you is a lot of people, when I started this podcast, kind of the opening little monologue I did, I said there are many untruths and half-truths about resilience and well-being. And, one of them is that these very, very traumatic experiences, and I'd say both of you have been through something that people would gauge on a, if we had some kind of barometer, is right up there, 10 out of 10 is in terms of really, traumatic, that they kind of break you, scar you, damage you, that you can't have a wonderful life, going forward. And of course you both, you kind of bust that myth, if you want to say, because even though, all these are still part of you, etc., they don't define you, and you can see the kind of beauty that you're both living with, and the optimism, and all those things, and the connection, the human connection, and we call it spiritual connection. But the thing that I wanted to ask you, that people might come out of this podcast and say, my belief is that we can get to that or experience that part of us, that unbreakable part of us, wherever we are. But sometimes it feels hard to do that in our normal lives. And because you guys, like I said, we've taken ourselves to Indonesia, we're spending time there, like it feels like, people will say, yeah, well, I can't do that. Like I can't go and get away from my life and go to a place when I can get quiet and do the work I need to do because of X, Y, and Z. So how do I not break or feel scarred? How do I feel whole or heal myself in my life, in my life as it is? So what would you say to that? Like, what kind of advice would you give people, or direction would you do you have for them?
Well, I mean, you can probably talk to like the very immediate tools that people can use.
Yeah, and I will say first that like I'm feel so much gratitude for my time that I have, because it's not a normal life that you get to go, or not, not a lot of people can take time away and have time to go and heal in the places that I've gone. So I feel so very lucky with that. And I would say though that healing can happen anywhere, and that really you just need, like, you need to connect with yourself. I mean, honestly, like as simple as putting a hand to your heart and a hand to your belly and closing your eyes and just noticing how it feels to breathe into your body and to breathe into your palms. Like starting with that, like a couple minutes a day in the morning and at night, beginning to connect with yourself. You don't have to be in any, really fabulous place that has a lot of healing, and to put yourself in healthy spaces. Like check out your local meditation, check out your local yoga class, like learn about yin yoga, like really put yourself in a place that's positioning you for healing, because we can't control what's happened, but we can choose how we let life affect us. And we can choose where at this moment we choose to go, and where you choose to position yourself. And having positioned myself in all the wrong places and finally finding the right places, it can happen anywhere, I believe. I mean, it started to happen in the town that I was in, the very small town, which was, it's the same town as my abuser, same town as everything happened. And, and so it can really start anywhere. And I would say that starts with connecting with yourself and learning your breath and learning what that feels like.
Yeah. And I think the important point that you just made is, there are many tools out there, and the tools can take, a variety of forms, but it's the choice, making the conscious decision that I want to heal, I want to be better, I want to live a more authentic, more whole life. Once you make that decision, then it can manifest, or you can find a way to manifest it in a variety of different ways. And I, from my particular experience, I had that very early on. I mean, I was like, okay, this is kind of a life and death situation, because I can get sucked under very easily, and, fall into a dark depression, or potentially suicide, or I can not do that. And what does the not doing that look like? And once I made that choice, then the other stuff that has to get there kind of presented themselves,
And I'll add to that too, like because I have felt so lost in my life at many moments, that even being really honest with that and asking for help, like, I don't know, you don't even have to be you can be religious or you can be spiritual. Simply just saying, like, before I would go to bed, like out loud to anyone that's listening, like, I am so lost, I'm open to guidance, like getting real with that first and asking for help. And like, for me, it's like spirituality and having spirit guides putting you in different places, and, you know, finding a book or having somebody say something or going to a different place, like being honest about how lost you are and asking for help is really helpful. And I've had a lot of great success in that, and being pushed into different places that I probably wouldn't have found if I wasn't so honest about how much help I needed.
Yes. No, I love both of those. I mean, both of those I use in my life. I always feel like, you know, like for me, again, coming back to God, because I'm a God person, as I said, you know, God wants to have a relationship with us, but we have to have a relationship with him. And part of asking is opening. And I've seen in those times when I've opened myself up and asked, then things start to happen. And back to what Max said, I think this is such an important point about almost that intentionality, that kind of choosing that, you know, I remember after I'd kind of tried to take my life and had been in a coma, and I'd come out of, you know, made it and came out of hospital. And then I had a beautiful experience for like 6 weeks of just a feeling, you know, you could say my soul, just this clarity and this incredible place of gratitude for no reason. Nothing was fixed that I needed to feel, that it brought me to such a dark place. Nothing had changed, but yet I was feeling this. And afterwards, I intentionally in my mind decided that instead of going down the path I was going down, which was, you know, a lot of kind of drugs and psychiatrists and that, I was going to move away from that and spend 6 months seeing if I could find that place within me. I called it like my invincible summer, you know, if I could find it, because if it showed up for no reason, maybe it was in me all the time, and I could, you know, find a way to access it. So I intentionally went on a different path. And I think when you're on that and you're curious and things come your way, it's almost like you make the space for things to show up. So yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Jazz has a phrase that she uses a lot, is that spirit meets you at intention. So if you set the intention, spirit meets you at intention. So if you set your intention, you know, the universe, God, spirit will meet you there.
Beautiful. Yeah. Love it. I just wanted to thank you. I mean, I think you're amazing, and this has been so wonderful. And I'm sorry we did have our viewers were no technical issues to start with, but thanks for hanging in there.
It was so worth it.
Yeah.
It was just so lovely. And you know, as I said, Jasmine, we've got other. I'm gonna slip into your DMs but really lovely to see you together, and you know, you should just have a lot of blessing and good things in your journey together, and in helping people. You're going to be a real force to be reckoned with, the two of you. So thank you for this kind of time with me, and I just know people are going to love this and get a lot out of this. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. It was nice to reconnect with you again, Terry.
So welcome. And in the notes to the podcast, people will be able to see the links to both your websites, to Max as an artist, and Jasmine, your work as well, yoga, and all the wonderful work you're doing. So and see more about you.
Wonderful.
Okay. Thanks so much, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow or subscribe so that you can stay up to date with our latest episodes.